Welcome to On the Ground for Palestine and Israel for the week of May 21st, 2022, brought to you by Kumi Now. We start with the latest developments in the killing of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Israel has announced that it will not launch a criminal investigation into the death of the journalist, despite all but admitting that she was killed by a soldier. On Thursday, the Israeli military stated that it had, quote, identified a soldier's rifle that may have killed Shireen, but argued that it, quote, cannot be certain unless the Palestinians turn over the bullet for analysis. But even turning over the bullet for analysis seems to be a pointless step, as the Israeli military has also declined to order a probe because, quote, there is no suspicion of a criminal act. And why not? Because the soldiers, according to Haaretz, quote, testified that they did not see the journalist at all and aimed their fire at gunmen who were indeed nearby. In response, nearly 60 House Democrats in the United States have signed on to a letter sent to the State Department and FBI, calling for an independent investigation into the killing. We will, of course, follow this story and see if anything comes of it. In Israeli politics, the government of Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid potentially lost their majority government when another Meretz Knesset member, Ghada Renawi Zoabi, delivered a letter saying that she no longer saw herself as part of the coalition, nor would accept her appointment as Israel's next consul general in Shanghai. She wrote that, quote, again and again, the heads of the coalition preferred to take harsh, hawkish, right-wing steps on key issues related to Arab society. And she went on to cite Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount, Sheikh Jarrah settlements, house demolitions, the citizenship law, and land confiscations in the Negev. This is not a done deal, and Meretz leader Nitzan Horowitz hopes to convince her to stay in the government. If she carries through with the departure, it could lead to another round of elections in the fall. In Gaza, Wafa reports that fishermen and farmers in the Gaza Strip just today, Saturday the 21st of May, came under Israeli gunfire, forcing them to leave their areas. Israeli soldiers at a military watchtower east of Gaza City opened fire and fired tear gas canisters at farmers working in their lands, while in Khan Yunis in the south, soldiers fired at shepherds east of Al-Qarara's town, and Israeli Navy boats fired at fishermen sailing in the south of the Gaza Strip, forcing them to return to shore. No one was reported injured in any of the incidents. According to Wafa, quote, Israel does not allow landowners and shepherds to be in the open pastures and lands near the border fence and tries to create a buffer zone at the expense of the Gaza lands. Fishermen also are not allowed to go deeper than 6 nautical miles into the sea, into the south of Gaza Strip, and only 3 nautical miles in the north. But even then, fishermen are still attacked even if they stay within their marked zones. The Gaza Strip has been under tight Israeli sea, land, and air siege since 2005. The Palestine Chronicle reports that the family of Palestinian activist Nizar Banat, beaten to death by Palestinian security forces while in detention on June 24, 2021, announced on Wednesday they are no longer pursuing a case through the Palestinian judiciary and are, instead, turning to international courts for justice. According to the paper, Banat was one of the most well-known critics of corruption within the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority continues its investigation, but the 14 suspects were released from prison without a legal order. Banat's death sparked a number of protests in the West Bank, which Palestinian security forces met with violence. Following up on a story we covered last week, the settlers who moved into a building in Hebron without a permit have evacuated the building only 2 days after occupying it. A Palestinian man from Jerusalem, Mohammed Ja'arabi, claims to be the building's rightful owner and said he filed a police complaint. However, this is not yet a happy ending. The settlers only left the building after the Israeli military said it would secure it, leaving the building in limbo. To purchase a building in the West Bank, which the settlement group claims it has done, one must obtain a transaction permit. No such permit has yet been submitted, but if it is, it sets up a possible civil administration registration committee process that could take years, during which Mohammed's building could be locked and denied to him. And in international relations, Israel and Kosovo further cemented relations with a number of bilateral agreements on Monday. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid met with his Kosovar counterpart, Dominika Javala-Schwartz, who visited Jerusalem for the first time. Kosovo opened its embassy in Jerusalem last March, making it the first Muslim-majority state to open an embassy in Jerusalem, as opposed to Tel Aviv. Kosovo was one of the Muslim-majority countries that established relations with Israel in 2020, a part of Israel's goal of normalization. These close Israeli and Kosovo relations come with a twist of irony, as Kosovo's independence is still contested on the world stage. Israel only reluctantly became the 117th country to recognize its independence, having been previously reluctant to do so, afraid it would set a precedent for Palestine's own quest for global recognition. In activism news, 972 magazine hosts a series of photos and an article by the photographer and writer Ahmad Albaz, who has spent the last 6 months traveling Israel documenting what remains of the hundreds of villages and towns destroyed during the Nakba. This being a podcast, we suggest you head to the link listed in the show notes to see the contrast between the Palestinian remains and Israeli construction. And in Canada, a 5-year legal battle over the labeling of wines produced in illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. And in Canada, a 5-year legal battle over the labeling of wines produced in illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank has come to a close. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, ruled this week that product of Israel labels affixed to wines produced in illegal West Bank settlements violate Canadian consumer protection laws. The complaint was filed by Dr. David Kattenberg, who argued that under the Fourth Geneva Convention, it was inaccurate to label the wines produced in those settlements as product of Israel. Finally, for the past couple weeks, we've been following Germany's crackdown on activism for Palestine. They argue that such activism could lead to anti-Semitism. Despite the ban, during Nakba Day last weekend, pro-Palestinian activists in Berlin insisted on commemorating the 1948 expulsion. By the end of the day, the city's police had arrested more than 170 protesters and supporters. According to reporting by 972 magazine, witnesses argued that police were targeting Arabs and people of color, even if they weren't part of the demonstration. And activists were targeted and arrested for simply holding Palestinian flags, wearing keffiyehs, or shouting "Free Palestine." That's the news for this week. On the Ground for Palestine is produced by Kumi Now, an initiative of Sabeel Jerusalem that is focused on nonviolent solutions to occupation based on international law. This week, Kumi Now focuses on efforts to preserve Palestinian culture and history. We have a webinar this Tuesday at 6 p.m. Palestine time with Dr. Awad Halabi, who has worked with the Nabi Musa Festival. Information on the webinar, Kumi Now, the newsletter, and everything else is available in the show notes in your podcast app or in the information below the video on YouTube. And a quick production note, next Saturday, we head to Jerusalem on some personal business. As such, the podcast will likely be a day late next week and should come out on Sunday. Remember, links to the stories and everything else mentioned are always available in the show notes or below the video. If you like this weekly roundup, we suggest you join us at kuminow.com, follow us on social media, and join our weekly Kumi Now newsletter. You can sign up at kuminow.com/register. You can let us know what you think of this news roundup by emailing us at kumi@kuminow.com. We thank you for your role in activism for Palestine and Israel, for only together may we rise up.